Every February 14th, millions of people around the world celebrate love. They buy flowers, exchange chocolates, and send cards covered in hearts and cupids. It's a day of romance, sweetness, and affection. But what if I told you that Valentine's Day has one of the darkest, bloodiest origins of any holiday we celebrate today? Today, we're diving deep into the disturbing history behind Valentine's Day. From ancient Roman blood rituals to Christian martyrdom to medieval murder plots, this story will change how you think about those heart-shaped candies forever. So buckle up, because this journey through history is going to get messy. Our story begins in ancient Rome around the 3rd century AD, but to understand Valentine's Day, we need to go back even further to a festival so violent and sexual that it would be banned in most countries today. This was Lupercalia. Picture this: every February 15th, Roman priests would gather at a sacred cave on Palatine Hill. This wasn't just any cave. This was supposedly where the legendary founders of Rome, Romulus and Remus, were nursed by a she-wolf. And what happened in this cave was about to get very, very bloody. The priests, called Luperci, would sacrifice goats and dogs. But here's where it gets disturbing. They wouldn't just kill these animals and walk away. No. They would take the blood-soaked knives and smear the foreheads of 2 young noble Romans with the fresh blood. Then, and this is historically documented, they would wipe the blood away with wool soaked in milk, and the 2 nobles were required to laugh during this entire grotesque ritual. But wait, it gets worse. The priests would then skin the sacrificed goats and cut the hides into strips. Young Roman men, often completely naked or wearing only these bloody goat skins, would run through the streets of Rome holding these strips of flesh. They called these strips februa, which is where we get the name February. And here's the truly shocking part. Roman women would actually line up to be struck by these bloody goat hide whips. They believed that being hit by the februa would make them fertile and ensure easy childbirth. Imagine explaining that to someone today. Hey, want to get pregnant? Let me hit you with this bloody animal skin. The Roman poet Ovid wrote about Lupercalia, describing how women would bare their bodies to receive these strikes. This wasn't considered degrading or violent. It was sacred. It was believed that the god Lupercus, protector of shepherds and fertility, was working through these blood-soaked rituals. But Lupercalia wasn't just about fertility. It was also about purification and protection. The Romans believed that these February rituals would cleanse the city and protect it from evil spirits and wolves. The very name Lupercalia comes from lupus, meaning wolf. They were literally trying to keep the wolves at bay with blood magic. This festival was so important to Roman culture that it continued for hundreds of years. Even as Christianity began to spread through the empire, Lupercalia persisted. The blood, the nudity, the pagan gods. None of it mattered to Romans who had celebrated this way for generations. Now, while Romans were running around naked with bloody goat skins, Christianity was slowly growing in the empire, and Christians had a very different view of love, marriage, and fertility rituals. They believed in one God, monogamous marriage, and definitely no blood-soaked fertility festivals. This brings us to our first Valentine. And yes, there were actually multiple people named Valentine who died for their beliefs. History gets murky here because early Christian records were often destroyed or rewritten. But the most famous story involves a priest named Valentine who lived during the reign of Emperor Claudius II, also known as Claudius the Cruel. Claudius had a problem. He was constantly at war, expanding the Roman Empire, and he needed soldiers. But he noticed that married soldiers were less effective in battle. They were homesick, distracted, worried about their families. So Claudius made a brutal decision. He banned young soldiers from getting married. No marriages, no families, no distractions, just pure, focused military service. This is where Valentine enters our story. He was a Christian priest who believed that marriage was a sacred sacrament blessed by God. When he heard about Claudius's ban, he was outraged, so Valentine began performing secret marriage ceremonies for young soldiers and their lovers. Picture this: in hidden underground chambers, by candlelight, Valentine would whisper the sacred words that would unite couples in the eyes of God. He knew the penalty for defying the emperor was death, but he believed that love and marriage were divine rights that no earthly ruler could ban. For months, maybe years, Valentine performed these secret ceremonies. Young soldiers would sneak away from their barracks, meet their lovers in hidden Christian chapels, and pledge their lives to each other while Valentine blessed their union. It was romantic, it was dangerous, and it was completely illegal. But empires have ways of discovering secrets. Roman informants were everywhere, and eventually, someone betrayed Valentine. Imperial guards burst into one of his secret ceremonies, arresting Valentine in the act of performing a forbidden marriage. Valentine was dragged before Emperor Claudius II himself. Historical accounts suggest that Claudius was actually impressed by Valentine's conviction. The emperor allegedly tried to convert Valentine to Roman paganism, offering him wealth, position, and safety if he would just abandon this Christian nonsense and stop performing marriages. Valentine's response was defiant. He not only refused to convert, but actually tried to convert the emperor to Christianity. He preached about the power of love, the sanctity of marriage, and the one true God. For a priest facing execution, this took incredible courage or incredible stupidity, depending on your perspective. Claudius was not amused. He ordered Valentine's execution, but here's where the story takes an interesting turn. While awaiting execution in prison, Valentine supposedly fell in love with his jailer's blind daughter. Some versions say he miraculously healed her sight through prayer. Others say she was just attracted to his kindness and faith. Either way, legend claims that on the eve of his execution, February 14th, 269 or 270 AD, Valentine wrote the first Valentine message. The note reportedly said, "From your Valentine," possibly the first time those words were ever written. The next morning, Valentine was beaten with clubs, stoned, and finally beheaded outside the Flaminian Gate in Rome. Fast forward 2 centuries. By 496 AD, Christianity had taken over the Roman Empire. Pope Gelasius I was looking at the calendar and seeing way too many pagan festivals still being celebrated by newly converted Christians. Lupercalia was still happening every February 15th, complete with the naked running and blood rituals, and the church was not having it. But here's the genius of early Christian strategy. Instead of just banning popular festivals and creating resentment, they replaced them with Christian alternatives. Pope Gelasius officially ended Lupercalia and declared February 14th as St. Valentine's Day, honoring the martyred priest. This wasn't just about changing dates. The church was deliberately trying to transform a bloody pagan fertility festival into a celebration of Christian love and martyrdom. Instead of being struck by bloody goat hides for fertility, Christians would now honor a saint who died for defending holy matrimony. But the transition wasn't smooth. For decades, maybe centuries, the celebrations were a weird hybrid. Some people still wanted the old festival elements. Others embraced the new Christian meaning. And many just used it as an excuse for whatever celebration they preferred. The church also had to deal with the fact that there were actually several different St. Valentines. Historical records mention at least 3 different Christian martyrs named Valentine who died around the same time period. There was Valentine of Rome, Valentine of Terni, and a third Valentine about whom almost nothing is known except that he died in Africa. The church eventually decided to combine all these stories into one composite St. Valentine. This created the perfect martyr for their new holiday, a priest who died defending love and marriage against a tyrannical emperor. It was romantic, it was tragic, and it completely overwrote the bloody pagan origins. But even with official church backing, St. Valentine's Day remained relatively minor for centuries. Medieval Christians recognized it, but it wasn't a major celebration. People had bigger concerns than romance, like not dying from plague, war, or famine. The transformation of Valentine's Day into a romantic celebration really began in medieval times, but even then, it was connected to violence and political intrigue. In 1400, Charles, Duke of Orleans, was captured at the Battle of Agincourt and imprisoned in the Tower of London. While locked away, he wrote love poems to his wife. One of these poems, written in 1415, is considered the oldest surviving Valentine. But remember, he's writing these romantic verses while imprisoned by his enemies, surrounded by instruments of torture, knowing he might never see his wife again. This perfectly captures the medieval understanding of love. It was always intertwined with suffering, loss, and often death. The concept of courtly love that dominated medieval literature was built on the idea that true love was painful, often impossible, and frequently tragic. But February 14th, 1400, also gave us one of the most shocking examples of how Valentine's Day could be connected to real political violence. This is the date of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. No, not the famous 1929 Chicago gangster incident, but a much earlier and equally brutal political assassination. In medieval England, nobles would sometimes choose symbolic dates for their political murders. February 14th became associated with revenge disguised as romantic gesture. Rivals would be invited to Valentine celebrations only to be murdered during the festivities. The most documented case involves Lord Reginald de Cobham, who was murdered by political rivals on February 14th, 1400. He had been invited to what he thought was a romantic feast celebrating St. Valentine's Day. Instead, he found assassins waiting for him. The irony was deliberate. Killing someone on the day dedicated to the Saint of Love was considered the ultimate revenge. Geoffrey Chaucer's poetry also helped establish the romantic connection, but even Chaucer's Valentine's poems often dealt with themes of loss, longing, and unfulfilled desire. Medieval love poetry was beautiful, but it was also deeply melancholic. The Protestant Reformation of the 16th century brought new violence to Valentine's Day traditions. Protestant reformers viewed St. Valentine's Day as Catholic superstition and actively tried to suppress its celebration. In England, Henry VIII's break with Rome meant that celebrating Catholic saints' days could be seen as treason. During the English Civil War, Puritan forces specifically targeted Valentine's Day celebrations as examples of Catholic corruption. There are records of Puritan soldiers interrupting Valentine's Day gatherings, destroying decorations, and arresting celebrants for popish practices. The irony is thick here. A holiday that began with pagan blood rituals was transformed by Christian martyrdom and evolved into romantic celebration, was now causing more bloodshed as different Christian factions fought over how to observe it. So there you have it, the bloody history of Valentine's Day. From naked Romans running through streets with bloody goat skins, to Christian priests being executed for defending marriage, to medieval political assassinations disguised as romantic celebrations. Today's Valentine's Day, with its pink hearts, chocolate boxes, and flower deliveries, bears almost no resemblance to its violent origins. The blood has been washed away by centuries of commercialization and cultural evolution. We've sanitized a holiday that began with literal blood sacrifice and martyrdom. But maybe that's not entirely bad. Maybe the evolution from Lupercalia's blood rituals to modern Valentine's Day shows how human civilization has progressed. We've kept the celebration of love while abandoning the violence. Or maybe Just maybe, when you're giving someone flowers on February 14th, you should remember that you're participating in a tradition that connects you to Roman priests wielding bloody knives, Christian martyrs facing execution, and medieval lovers writing poems while surrounded by their enemies. Love has always been worth dying for. Valentine's Day just reminds us that sometimes people actually did.